We live in an age that treats constant self-analysis as the only path to progress. We assume that being hyper-aware of our thoughts equals control. We tell ourselves that if we can just map every trauma or categorize every flaw with enough precision, we can eventually think our way into a state of peace. This is the state of metacognition, the mind stepping back to observe itself. In a vacuum, this creates a recursive loop, where the self is endless and lostly myself, unable to look at anything else. Without an external reference point, this loop behaves like a self-referential software bug. The system gets stuck processing its own processing, using up massive amounts of energy while remaining entirely stationary. This reprocessing creates a state of internal congestion. It's a form of mental compression, where the lines of thought tangle into a knot that is too dense to unravel and too unstable to maintain. Hyper-awareness, when it lacks a structural anchor, doesn't lead to clarity. It leads to a state of total psychological paralysis. Long before we had a clinical vocabulary for this kind of trap, ancient blueprints described it as the animal state of human consciousness. The ultimate symbol of this state is found in the story of Yūnus, trapped in the belly of the whale. In verse 2187, he reaches a moment of total self-recognition, declaring, "Indeed, I was among the wrongdoers." Consciousness wakes up in the dark. It becomes fully aware of its own presence, while under the crushing pressure of a situation it cannot control. In this phase, the mind is awake, but it is purely reflective. It can see its surroundings, but it lacks the internal architecture needed to move the system out of the void. Realizing you are in the dark is only the first step. Awareness by itself is not an engine. It cannot provide the force required to escape. So, if awareness alone is a trap, what is the specific switch that initiates the escape? The protocol initiates at the breaking point, the moment the recursive loop of overthinking reaches its limit and the internal structure begins to fail. A common instinct is to survive this pressure by becoming rigid, like a mountain. But verse 7143 demonstrates that relying on unyielding stubbornness causes the system to crumble when it encounters a higher force. Instead of the mountain, verse 1912 offers a different operator, the command to take the book with strength. This isn't an invitation to reflect on the text. It is an activation command. It is meant to violently interrupt the infinite loop by introducing an invariant anchor into the system. Gripping this external truth is what forces the system to transition from passive reflection into active, anchored execution. When this shift occurs, consciousness reconfigures into the resilient, living geometry of the tree, as described in verse 1424. The tree operates through a balance of opposing vectors. It begins with gravitropism, the downward force of roots gripping the dark earth. Simultaneously, the tree exerts an upward force called phototropism, the branches reaching for the light. This creates a structural paradox. The tree endures two opposing force vectors pulling in opposite directions at the exact same time. The core acts as a tensile center. It absorbs these conflicting forces and converts that tension into stable, resilient architecture. This is a lesson in spiritual engineering. An interconnected root system is the only mechanism preventing a system from being toppled by external chaos. Stability isn't about the absence of conflict. It's about building a core that is strong enough to absorb opposing forces without being torn apart. This state of structural stability is what verse 2269 refers to as Ḥikmah, or wisdom. We can see the difference between simple awareness and true wisdom by how they respond to a paradox. The metacognitive mind looks at a contradiction in life and becomes paralyzed by the tension of trying to resolve it. Wisdom, however, is a structure that can hold two contradictory truths together without needing to escape either of them. Brittle structures always fail. This stone statue is a symbol of inflexible authority, a system relying on sheer hardness that inevitably cracks under reality's weight. Real power is never found in rigid singularity. It is found in the ability to hold tension without breaking. We all experience moments of internal pressure where we feel the desperate need to control our environment. But the mountain that refuses to bend eventually turns to dust. The harder you try to be rigid, the more likely you are to crumble. Gripping the anchor of verse 1912 is what allows you to shift from that brittle state into the living structure of the tree. That state allows you to hold grief and certainty, gravity and light, descent and ascent, all at the exact same time. Final note, wisdom is not about finding more information to overthink. It is about building the internal capacity to bend to reality.